So, good morning. Did everyone enjoy the Gauntlet of Love? I came prepared, I'm sure like most of you, for something else, and there was all of my friends out there. We're waving, saying hi to everyone. So, we should have more protests like this. So, this is critical. This is Thinking Critically, Part 2. For those of you who missed last week, Scott and I are in the process of ultimately putting all this stuff together, and it will ultimately get up on Facebook, and we'll do things like that. We've been busy. I was sick. So then we're doing other things. So welcome. I wanted to remind you of my definition of critical thinking. It's a verb. It is not a noun. And that's why I turn it around and say thinking critically. Because it's a mental process. And that mental process is the integration of knowledge and skills and strategies and all these other things. We put them all together so that we can improve our problem-solving abilities, our rational decision-making, and enhance our creativity. One more time. Ah, we go. So what did we do last week? Well, last week we had a lot of videos and stuff, didn't we? It was a lot of fun. We looked at these human senses and found out that basically we're sight. We do sight mostly, and then hearing is a secondary thing. And so then we began to look at optical illusions. And of course they challenge you, don't they? You can see it, except it can't possibly be true, and that's the joy of the optical illusion. Then we went into inattentional blindness, and this is where we saw the gorilla. Or actually didn't see the gorilla. We also didn't see one of the participants walk off the stage. We also didn't see the curtain change from red to gold. Yeah, we just missed all of these things because we weren't looking for them. We were looking for something else, and we were consciously observing a particular thing rather than a general thing. We looked at change blindness, in which right in front of you a change occurs and you don't see it. There is a person talking, asking for directions. Could you help me find so-and-so? And a screen passes in between them, and the person who was originally talking picks up the screen, walks away, and a new person is standing there. And the people do not recognize them, including when it goes from a really short person to a really tall person, when it goes from a white person to a black person, when it goes from a man to a woman. They did not observe it. That's us. We don't see what's going on around us. We also took a look at color blindness and said this is a whole new way of looking at the world. It's different, but what can we say about people who are colorblind? They just see a different world. And I mentioned that my dad had a lens that he could see either direction, and he would poke fun at us because he could see two worlds and I could only see one. We also looked at synesthesia. That is, when the senses collide and overreact. Standard experiment. Take water, add food coloring to it, and ask people what the flavor is. If it's purple, they'll tell you it's grape. If it's yellow, they'll tell you it's lemon. If it's red, they'll tell you it's cherry, and so forth. They go right down the line, except it's water with food color. And finally, we went into some sleight of hand. That is, a professional, a person can do this, can confuse your sense of sight. And so the conclusions that we came to were the senses are working. They're working just fine. We have no problem with the senses themselves. It's the brain that gets involved. The brain is the computer, and the senses are the senses. The brain decides what's important and what is not important. The brain discards useless, trivial, or inconsequential information, and it makes the decision as to what is inconsequential. And the brain interprets all the data to make sense of the world, and thereby throws out between 1/2 and 75% of all the things you experience. Welcome to the brain. We can make the general statement, if you are looking for details, you will always miss the big picture. If you're looking for the big picture, you will miss the details. Again, that's how we work. That's how we understand the world. Therefore, we are prejudiced by definition. Can't get away from it. As long as you admit to being a human, sorry, that's us. And we'll see even more of that today. Today, a warning. This is science content. It is going to be somewhat dull. It won't be as exciting as last time. We won't see any dragons. Sorry. But it will be, hopefully, much more interesting. We're going to talk about the brain. We alluded to that last week. We said the brain is in charge of all of our senses. It controls everything. And now we're going to look at the brain itself. We're going to see how it changes over the span of your life. We're going to see how it works. And we're going to look at important biases and prejudices in light of this information. I did want to start with an historical perspective and talk about one of my favorites, Jean Piaget, who wrote the book in The Growth of Logical Thinking from Childhood to Adulthood in 1958. He's famous for his research before and immediately after World War II. He utilized apparatus with school children to determine what they could do, what their thinking processes were. Here's a typical apparatus. This obviously is a two-pan balance. For those of us who are familiar with it, yeah, it's a basic, simple tool. Now, when he then went and brought this to children at the ages of early school, kindergarten, that kind of thing, the children could not assemble it. They could not make it work. It was a complete mystery to them, even though they had been shown what this object was and how it worked. When one end went down, the child would pick it up and then release it to hope that it would somehow stay in line. Later on, late prepubescent children were able to assemble it, but only if the weights were out at the extreme end. If you took the weight and moved it in, the balance band, and moved it in, they go, no, 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 and put it right back out. That was the way they could do it. Later on, as teenagers, we found an interesting thing going on. Very, very early teenagers, very early, they could assemble it and make it work. Move the balance bands in and out, use the weights, everything. They couldn't explain why. Later teenagers could explain the entire thing and say, oh yeah, it's distance times weight. So if you move it in twice, you've got to put it twice. Don't worry about it. So it takes a while. Now, what did Piaget say about this after all of these experiments? There were very, very many. He came up with basically three proposals. First off, that children pass through a specified developmental sequence in the same order. That this development sequence is irreversible, one way only, and that this development sequence is a result of physiological changes in the brain. No one believed him. No one believed him because it wasn't possible to confirm this. It reminds me very much of Darwin. He said, well, it can't be right because we can't prove it. And then along came DNA, and we went, oh, yeah. Well, in this case, along came the National Institutes of Mental Health. These are the same ones that had the rats of Nim. And fMRI studies of the human brain. They took 1 year intervals and looked at the human brain. They did it with several individuals. I should ask the question first, though, what is fMRI versus MRI? fMRI is this one on the right. The MRI is the one on the left. MRI scans and tells you about physical objects. It's the three-dimensional picture of an anatomical feature. fMRI images are metabolic activity. So in one case you see the physical brain, and the other case you see the brain operating. And so we were interested in the brain's operation and began to look at the fMRI of the human brain. Now hopefully I can get this to work. This is a composite of ages 5 through 20 years, and hopefully I can make this thing work. Scott, can you activate that? Okay, so watch the blue piece up here. The blue piece up here. You notice how that changes and goes and becomes blue and blue and blue and blue. This is the metabolic change. Why don't we do that one more time? Right through here. Notice? Okay? Now, that happened really quickly. So, if we count past 5, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, yeah. Even better. Pitches. So here we are at the age of 5 years, right in here, looking at the side and top of the brain. We can see the development. Here is the blue part right in here. What is happening? When your brain is at the earliest stages of development, when you're a baby, your brain is 100% gray matter. Gray matter. Over time, the brain changes. Right here, to white matter. What the heck's going on here? This is the process. We can see that in these areas here, there is absolutely no white matter. It's all gray matter. Over time, we see it developing here in the medial area. It's here. This is spatial coordinates. We see it going down further. We see some development into the temporal regions. Get time going in here. This is late teenage years. We can see a lot of this development going on, and it's really beginning to get into the frontal lobes. And here is the 20-year-old. Major developments here in the frontal areas. We will also suggest the following. It's in this area right here that is your executive function of your brain. We'll get into the executive function of the brain a little bit more, but this is adult. When you go, should we really be doing that? As you know, teenagers don't do that. They just do. There's no, and you ask them, why did you do that? And they go, I don't know. Whereas adults go, should we really be doing that? There's a huge difference there. Almost immediately after these studies, Reid began looking at the human brain in terms of the brain mass. He discovered that as children, we grow up and get a larger and larger and larger brain up until the time of puberty. Just before puberty is the maximum size your brain is going to be. Typically, that's something on the order of what? 2.25 pounds, something on that order. It's primarily gray matter, but white matter is increasing gradually, as we just saw. At puberty, the brain goes through a huge transition. The brain mass decreases with synaptic pruning of the gray matter. You actually lose your brain. So when you say to your teenager, did you lose your brain? Yes, they did. Really? You have this beautiful 12-year-old who's so smart and so intelligent, and at 13 they turn into a dummy? Yes. By the way, you did too. Don't tell anyone. The second thing that's happening is myelination. Myelin is a protein which coats the neurons themselves. And so it is a white material, and so the gray matter turns into white matter with myelination. And the thing about white matter and myelination is the speed of transmission is about 100 times faster in white cells than it is in gray cells. Oh, so we've got a good reason for doing this. The gray matter brain grew as big as it could possibly be. We were as smart as it could possibly be. To get any smarter, we had to go through a change. We had to do something else. We had to get to the white matter stage. If I take a sort of a graph, obviously this is not a mathematically perfect graph. This is a general representation. We see that the brain is growing bigger and bigger and bigger with time. Here at puberty, the total matter drops off, but even more important, the amount of gray matter drops off. This is all white matter. So your brain is actually smaller. You don't have to continue to grow the size of your skull. And it's much better at doing brain things. If I overlay Piaget on top of Guide, we see relationships such as this. This is Piagetian stage 1 down here. Actually, 1A is here, and this is 1B. Here's Piagetian stage 2, and here's Piagetian stage 3. There is a stage 4. It's adult, and we don't often talk about it very much because only about a quarter of all adults ever get there. They stay somewhere in here. So we overlay that, and we've got a good idea, and we'll keep coming back to this particular slide to look at how some of these prejudices come into our lives. Bornier and Garali did further work on the white matter. They found that white matter was directly responsible, equates to the development of cognitive functions, that maturation equates to the development of sensory motor functions, and that white matter maturation equates to the ability to retain and retrieve verbal and spatial information. Oh, so yeah, it's demonstrated that, yeah, you do want to have white matter brain. It's faster, it's bigger, it's better. It does all of these things better than we could ever do with a gray matter brain. The transition is a little tricky. It's called teenage. Oh, we try to ignore that, remember? Junior high, oh, never mind. So let's think about some things. We know something about the growth and development of the human brain, and let's consider some of the prejudices which we acquire in relationship to this brain growth. The first example I want to bring about was a study by Bloom and Weisberg. Bloom and Weisberg wrote this paper. It's called Childhood Origins of Adult Resistance to Science. How appropriate, huh? We ask, why are some adults so resistant to science? We can present them with any amount of data, but they'll reject it, always, in favor of a simplistic and or realistic notion. What was the conclusion that Bloom wrote and came to? He emphasizes the early childhood, 3 to 4 years of age. The beginning, these developmental stages suggest that resistance to science will arise in children when scientific claims clash with early emerging intuitive expectations. Intuitive. As a child, you're beginning to explore this world. You have a good suspicion of how it works. You know that things are permanent, that the peekaboo doesn't work anymore. You know if you drop something, it goes down. You have all of these intuitive expectations of how the world works. And if someone tells you that God did it, you will accept that as a datum. Conclusion 2, this resistance will persist through adulthood if scientific claims are contested within a society. If you are in a closed society, you're going to stick with it, no matter what it is. And it will be especially strong if there are non-scientific alternatives. They're rooted in common sense. There's that word again, common sense. And championed by people who are thought to be reliable and trustworthy. That is, authorities. Oh. So what are we talking about here? Are we talking about parents? Yes. Are we talking about siblings? Yes. Aunts, uncles? Yes. Ministers, priests? Yes. Teachers? Yes. Anyone who has a major influence upon your thinking processes and your memory. If you are in a highly religious society, which rejects science automatically, these explanations will remain dominant in your personality through adulthood. Even those of us who have figured it out, if you started out with this, and we can test this, your instantaneous reaction will be 3-year-old. And then your executive functions will kick in and you go, no, that isn't right. Amazing, huh? You are a 3-year-old. Really. Let's consider this in terms of the Piagetian and Guide stages. If we look at this, obviously, this is down in this area here. This is even before stage 1B. So this is extremely early childhood, long before we would expect a child to really be thinking. So we look at the foundation of a person's worldview, and it's that of a person of less than 5 years of age. Religious teachers, leaders provide truths. Other authorities provide truths. And if contradictory authority or information is suppressed, adults retain early childhood worldviews throughout the rest of their lives. And it's almost unshakable. So the foundation of a person's worldview occurs really early. Let's see, now we're going to... So I've assigned this as Piagetian stage 1 behavior. And I think we can all see that that's true. It's before the graph even. Example 2. Dunning and Erlanger are people that you just must pay attention to. The first one of these I'm simply going to put up here. This is how people fail to recognize their own incompetence. Now, Dave Duncan was the first researcher to popularize this. He was not the original. There were others who were out there, but he's the one who popularized this. Just to give you a small example of some of the things he's done, here's a small example of some of his works. Yeah, he really has done a lot. And this has become such a standard thing that in all master's degree programs, we professors will send our students out to do one of these. It's a simple test to do. We can put it all together easily. It's easily accepted. We know what the results are going to be, and we watch our students go, oh my goodness. And so it really is a wonderful thing for a teacher to have such an easy course to run. This is the first of many experiments. We asked, let's go back one. We asked 141 students to tell us what they had done on an exam, how well they had done. Then estimate their performance and mastery of course materials relative to other students. And then estimate the raw score. Sounds easy. Those who flunked the course should know they flunked the course. Those who aced it should know it, right? Wrong. This is standard. Here are the people down at the bottom of the chart. Right here. Notice it's about the 10th percentile. 90% of all people did better. Oops.
Scott thinks he knows what he's doing.
Now, here's what they think they did. Now, on the other extreme, here are the people at the very top. You know, if they're 85 percentile way up here. Here's what they think they did.
Joanne, can you explain this a little bit more?
Sure.
I'm not sure everyone really clearly understands
now,
what the three
here is
lines
the
are.
actual results of the test.
Just because you don't doesn't mean...
But I'm willing to admit it.
Now, this solid line here is the perceived mastery of the material. And this dotted line here is their perceived test performance. These are perception. This is reality.
Do they take into account that people aren't going to walk out the door and say, I bombed this? And just throw that on the table?
Well, notice that the
Everyone say
people
thanks?
who were at the very top actually didn't think they did as well. And the people at the very bottom, oh, they think they're superb. We're wonderful. And they blow it entirely. This is standard. This is why we can assign this, because we know what the results are before it's going to be done. We know the test. Here's the second one. All right, we've got 238 students. Intermediate level, large psychology course. So intermediate level. So we're talking sophomores and juniors. The exam consisted of 22 multiple choice questions and 3 essays worth 6 points apiece. 5 weeks later, we do the same thing. What were the results? as I said, you're going to get bored with this. There's the bottom, actual performance. There's the top, actual performance. And here's what everyone thinks they did. Again, bottom performer thinks they're in the 60th percentile. Top performer says, well, and actually drops down from roughly 80 to roughly 65. This is normal. People who think they are who are really, really, really good at it, figure everyone is good at it. This can't be that hard. And people who have no idea what they're doing always make believe that they're really, really good at it. Cornell University holds a big debating tournament. Again, collegiate debating teams. They would really have a good idea of what they're doing, wouldn't they? Let's take a look. Now, once again, actual performance. The worst teams were in the 20th, down in the 20th percentile. The best teams were up in the 60th. Again, this is a college debating team. Here's what they think they did. Bottom, top.
Joanne, can you equate that to maturity?
We're about to do that.
Okay.
We asked participants, now these are, again, college level students. We asked them to complete a test on knowledge of American Standard Written English at the collegiate level. I hate to do this. There it is. Once again, can you imagine, these are in college, American Standard Written English, and they're in the 15th percentile. 85% of all people do better than them. And they're in college. Up the top here, 90 percentile. Again, we know that 90th percentile is pretty darn good. Here's what they think they did. Notice everyone is clumped in here in 60th to 70th percentile. Everyone. So the top people, under, they're looking at what they did and they say, well, eh. And the people down here overestimate. So we have an underestimate and an overestimate at the opposite ends of the scale.
Any gender bias?
No. This is across the board. There was a really cool one where we tested an open class, and we sorted by male, female, regarding their ability to do science. All the students came out the same. Then we said, now, who wants to take a science course? And all the guys raised their hand and none of the gals did. And we find no difference quantitatively in their skill levels. It was all in their attitudes. So again, that's something that we educators really need to work on. Here's our conclusions. And these come across the board. Notice that the low performers always overestimate. They perceive themselves as above average. That they're unaware of their abilities and unaware of other people's abilities. And even when we try to train them to see what's going on, they cannot learn to perceive their abilities and relative standing. On the other hand, the high performers, they underestimate their abilities and their standings relative to others. They overestimate other people's abilities. And they perceive their performance as being normal. And they can learn to perceive their abilities. The moment they learn that, yeah, you're actually really good at this, then, okay, they can begin to look at it and say, all right, I'm doing better than other people at this. Conclusion 2. Poor performers fail to recognize their own incompetence because they lack the skills needed to produce the correct answers. So this is the vicious circle. They're incapable of knowing that their answers are right or wrong. They assume that they are as good as others because they don't know how to evaluate their own performance. High performers fail to recognize their superiority. They assume that others are as knowledgeable as they are. Therefore, regardless of actual performance, both good and bad performers perceive themselves as being slightly above average, 60th percentile, 70th, something in there. Conclusion 3. Low performers will often dispute their poor performance. Again, the ego gets in there. They remain convinced they are superior, therefore they blame the test. This can result in legal disputes. Major legal disputes when the test involves important goals such as employment, promotion, achieving degrees or professional certification. Legal suits can lead to changes in performance tests, which have included the civil service exam, police and firefighters exam, college entrance exams, CPA and bar exams. These have all been contested and have all resulted in the same thing. The test was blamed. So what was the answer? We dummied it down. Yeah. If we take a look at this and we say, let's consider this in terms of the Guy Piaget chart, what do we see here? We see that we have the stages of development here. Oops, let's go back. Back one. Come on. Here's our stages of development again. Early childhood, late childhood, teenage, adult. If we look at the behavior of young children are not highly competitive. Yes, they will compete with each other. There will be squabbles, but you will not find knockdown, drag-out battles for status. That doesn't happen to children. When does it happen? Welcome to junior high. Yes, with the onset of puberty, we see all sorts of exciting things happening. So, puberty, new toys, and they've never been used before. Social skills, social hierarchy, social standard are suddenly important. Mating and dating selection, very important. So perception is suddenly the important thing. And you exaggerate. You exaggerate what you can do. You don't want to exaggerate so far that you get called on it. Right? Because that could be embarrassing when you're standing out in front of your peers and all of a sudden you can't perform. So if you just exaggerate a little bit, well, I'm a little better than average. I'm not a superstar. No, nothing like that. But I'm pretty good at this. You get the standard response of all teenagers. Welcome to Piagetian type 3 behavior. Here we are. For teenagers, it's important to be perceived as more skilled, more accomplished, and more capable than your peers. To elevate your own social standing and mate selection opportunities. These successful behaviors do carry over into the very, very next stage of your life. I mean, you're a 16, 17, 18-year-old. 25 is not that far away. I know it's very far away to them, but to us, we don't. It's microseconds. Let's take a look at the third example, and this is a very interesting but confusing one. I will try to unconfuse it as much as possible. This is the automatic mental associations predict future choices of undecided decision makers. Yeah. We tested whether automatic mental associations of people who declare themselves to be undecided are in fact biased. We check their biases on their future choices such that the ultimate decision in fact reflects the automatic mental associations they've always been carried. That is, do biases drive our decisions regardless of whether we're conscious of it or not? Does this drive us, our 3-year-old, or does this drive us, our adult? We know the answer. We don't actually have to do this, do we? All right, let's do this. Stage 1, we had to do a pre-test in order to make sure that our test scheme worked. And it did, yay! So we could go on to stage 2. Stage 2, we did 2 tests involved in opposite weeks. We asked 129 residents of the city of Venezia in Italy a single question as to whether the participants are in favor of a particular political issue, a 10-item survey, then a computer-based response latency test. How quickly do you respond? The faster you respond, the more it comes from here. The slower you respond, the more it comes from here. And this was done twice at a 1-week interval. So giving the people time to make their decision. So we looked at this experiment. We said, all right, what's going on in the first week? Conscious beliefs, remember, are up here. Automatic are back here. Automatic associations, these back here, were relatively stable for both decided and undecided participants. So this part of the brain stays as it was. Conscious beliefs, these up here, where you're working with your conscious brain, were relatively stable for undecided. And highly stable for decided. All right, so in the first instance, everything's copacetic. We're doing good. Automatic associations at time 1 significantly predicted changes in conscious belief for the undecided. This part predicted, if you said you were undecided, it predicted what this part was going to do in the future. The 3-year-old wins. Conversely, conscious beliefs at time 1 significantly predicted changes in automatic associations for decided participants. If you had thought it through and figured it out, it reinforced what you were already going to do. We know about that bias, don't we? Confirmation bias? For undecided participants, future conscious beliefs were determined by their earlier automatic associations. Once again, the 3-year-old wins. Decided participants, conscious beliefs, predicted changes in automatic associations. And conscious beliefs may have strengthened associations that are in line with these beliefs. Oh. We went on again. We looked further into this. Just to confirm what we were doing. Decided participant choices at time 2, remember, we did it once and then we did it a week later. Decided participant choices predicted their consciously held beliefs. Automatic associations were unrelated to future choices. Conversely, undecided participants were significantly predicted by automatic associations. If you tell me you're undecided, I say, no, you're not. You have already done it. Back here. You may not know that you've done it, but you have. Back here, that decision has already been made. And it just hasn't come up to the front. You haven't consciously recognized it yet. Oh, dear. So we continue to look at this and we say, conscious beliefs and future choices of undecided participants are to a significant extent determined by their earlier automatic associations from childhood. We're all 3. Really. 3-year-olds win. These effects occur only for the undecided, but not for the decided decision makers. The decided decision makers have already made that decision. Where did that decision come from? Most likely from right here. They then express some interesting long-term implications, which were reflected in the most recent presidential election. The most intriguing examples being the prediction of voting decisions. I've highlighted some stuff. Political scientists predict election outcomes, and we know that this has been problematic. We all remember some of us remember Dewey wins in 1948, and he didn't. Well, Clinton wins. No, didn't happen. So what they're suggesting is prediction of election outcomes should be enhanced by including modern measures of automatic associations. And as we discovered in our 2020 hindsight of looking at the last election cycle, if we had paid more attention to the down and dirty beliefs of people, plain, ordinary folk, this decision was a no-brainer. It was over before it was over. And that was primarily, of course, because of the way this is all set up. Hi.
I disagree with you on your conclusion. Our electoral college system increasingly
Again,
is a variable
we
that
can get into it, but
popular vote is being subverted.
indeed, and we talked about gerrymandering and all that other kind of
Yeah,
stuff,
so I would.
but we
your
grossly
conclusion is
underestimated the
entirely
popularity
correct.
Yes.
of that man. So let's consider this in terms of Piaget, and we see that this is not a stage 1 or stage 2. It doesn't seem to fit into stage 3 either. Where does it fit in? This is adult. When we look at Piaget adult, we talk about stage 4 as characterized by implementation of executive functions. The ability to say, no, I am not going to do this, I'm going to do something else. The executive functions arise in the frontal temporal lobes. This is the last area to be myelinated. The executive function control biases. They force reconsiderations of thoughts and actions. They provide alternatives and what-if scenarios. So when you're going down and you're making a decision, you're going to do something, go, no, let's think about that. That's the executive functions kicking in. It's seldom achieved. Less than 25% of humans over the age of 25 ever achieve Piagetian stage 4. If we look at these results, we can say, all right, what's going on here? The participants recognize the opinions of others. That's something no teenager ever does, right? Participants recognize biased opinions may not be acceptable to others, and they recognize that research to evaluate options reduces conflicts with others. So I say I'm undecided and I'm looking into it. I'm going to study this problem. Now, here the fourth one, I put a question mark in here because it's not necessarily coming straight out of the research. How do people mostly do research on their own opinions? They look up the opinions of other people who agree with them. If you're Charles Krauthammer, you're going to look up Charles Krauthammer, you're going to look up John Newdecker and people like that, and you go, yep, it proves exactly what I said. If not, you're going to go to Anderson Cooper and you're going to go to other people and say, oh, that's how it works. And the participants are actively hiding their actions until they've been performed. These are very adult things. These are very adult in that they depend upon our abilities in the executive functions to perform the action. And so by this we now come full circle, don't we? The biases which resulted in the undecided making of decisions were formed in early childhood. The study confirms that biases acquired in childhood are retained into adulthood. And we also note that the bragging behavior exemplified in example 2 were suppressed, which again is evidence of Piagetian stage 4. So I'm going to conclude this morning's talk about this and say we've seen that physical changes in the human brain occur as the brain matures. We've seen the changes in learning capacity of the brain as it matures. We've studied 3 important sources of biases, by no means not all. There are trillions of ways of acquiring biases. And we've studied 3 important sources of the biases, and we've identified them in terms of Piagetian stage of development. We've identified some known problems associated with these biases. And I hope that we're going to have a really cool discussion about this. Next time, tune in, same time, same station. And we'll begin to think about logical arguments, including syllogisms, conditional logic, validated premises and conclusions. And of course, as in any science talk, you've got to have your bibliography. Okay. Just a few references. Thank you. I hope this was thought-provoking. It should raise a trillion really good questions. Beth?
Does any of this relate to intelligence itself?
Can you repeat the question, because I'm not sure.
Does this relate to intelligence? And the fact is, no, it doesn't. We find that we're emotional. Humans are emotional. And the human emotions are pretty much all of us. And can the intellect overcome in stage 4? Yeah, that's what the whole idea of the development of this part of the brain is concerned. And is that related to intelligence? No, not really. You can baffle the most intelligent people. In fact, as we did last week with the sleight of hand, I have seen notable scientists. And again, as scientists, we're always aware of the fact that we're dead wrong. And we're looking for new information. And when new information that appears to be credible comes our way, we go, and we change our minds. We begin to review the world in a new world view. And so when a guy comes along and does magic tricks in front of us, and we can't explain it, we're baffled. And we go, it shouldn't be right, but I'm sitting here watching it, so it has to be right. And we're ready to change our worldview. And of course, this is when people like the great Randy and the others like that, Penn and Teller, come along and say, no, this is a trick. We're simply fooling your senses. And the more intelligent you are, the more likely it is that you will be fooled. And you go, oh, drat. It's not supposed to work that way. But it does. So intelligence really has nothing to do with it. Hi, yes, ma'am.
So you said only 25% reached stage 4.
Indeed.
So how has that number been arrived at and measured? And you're telling me people are just stuck in stage 3 for their life?
Yes. Again, this Piagetian thing is all comes from these test apparatus. And we can get, of course, more and more complicated test apparatus to the point of the decision-making has to be quantitative cognitive, so that it's easy to make mistakes and you have to look at the mistakes you're making in order to come back and make it work. And so a child can't even begin to fathom it. Teenagers will get it wrong, and then adults can go, oh boy, screwed that up, didn't I? Never mind, and rearrange it. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a little confused on one
Only a little?
on one slide, I think I saw you saying that in the bottom quartile that thought they did really well, that one of the explanations was that they just don't know what the right answers were. Later you said that it's because of the desire to impress people that your status is higher, which...
Well, they
Can you
don't know.
repeat that again?
The question was, when you get to that bottom quartile, who's overly imagine their skills, there's the possibility, of course, that they don't understand what they're doing, and the whole idea of impressing people. And these are two separate problems. The first one is not recognizing your own abilities or inabilities, and the second one is your attempt to impress other people. And regardless of your skill levels, you're always out there trying to impress. So one is intellectual and the other is emotional. And as we know, these are two entirely separate problems inside of the human being and really not related. So when I give you a test, I'm doing this part. And when I say, how well did you do? Now that's the emotion. And now emotionally, how well did I do? Oh, I'm pretty good at this. Were you really? No, you were terrible. And when I tell you you're terrible, you will react emotionally. And go. So again, it comes back to the idea of intellect versus emotions. And we find that we are emotional people. That the intellect really can be overwhelmed by our emotions. So yeah, you can be right at the bottom there, overestimating like crazy, and still telling other people how well you did. And that's how you do it. You tell them how well you did. Remember, the present occupant of the White House is the smartest man ever to be in the White House. Piagetian stage 3.
Being in high school, I have quite a few friends who have major test anxiety and react.
It gets worse in college.
All right. Well, I was wondering if that related in any way to what you were just saying about how they think emotionally they did a certain way, and then when they get the actual results, there's an emotional response. Is there a sort of predictive something going on there? I'm not sure if it relates.
Yes and no. We can look at that from a completely different point of view. Test anxiety is often related to your knowledge of the subject. The people who walk into a class and walk into an exam and they got it cold. They walk in and they just do it. The people who are most anxious are the people who have not really done their studying. They're several weeks behind. They didn't get their homework in on time. They ignored the terrible grades they were getting. When the prof said to them, you have to come in and see me, we really need to discuss your progress, they ignored them. They didn't come to any afternoon classes. They didn't go to any weekend classes. Well, they should be nervous. They're going to flunk. But that's how it is. There are also those who are really, really, really good, and they get really bollocksed up in their own emotions. That can be a problem, and it's often the case where the teacher really has to extend themselves out to that particular student and go, come on, sit down, relax. You'd almost want to have them have a drink, but you can't do that. But yeah, in college we do that. Of course, then there's the college where you do it and you go, oh God, what am I doing? Yeah.
Well, you were saying that at a very young age, children, for example, let's say a child has been brought up in a religious family with very rigid ideas, that this child, even as an adult, would still revert to that. But Unitarians are people who come up, many Unitarians weren't Unitarians to begin with in their family, but they reject those childhood ideas. How do you account for that?
Oh, that's pretty straightforward. We can do a nice little test there. We can do it with time. If I can set you up with a computer and I'll hit you with a series of different issues, which, multiple problems here. If I give you a time limit, let's say a tenth of a second to answer, you will answer with this part of your brain. Because that's the fast part. You don't have the time to think it through. If I give you time, you will probably answer quite differently. And so looking at the response, and again, we can set you up with the fMRI and see what kind of end of your brain is actually working on that problem. We'll see the first thing that happens is the back of your head, where you've got your basic thought patterns right here. That's the part that will react first. And it's the executive function that then takes over and says, let's think about that. So if you were brought up in a highly religious household, your first thought will be that religious explanation. Your executive function will then take over and go, no.
So
and you will begin to
Unitarians
engage.
basically need time.
Pardon me?
Unitarians need time.
Yeah, and again, do we have time? The time it takes for us to come from this extremely simplistic world to the much more complicated world that the scientists have shown us is in fact the way it is, takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of energy. You have to devote your time and energy to do this. It doesn't come easy, as we all know. And changing from a religious background to a scientific background is very hard. It's one of those maturation processes that brings us to stage 4. And but again, that's always back there because that's where we started. That's the basal level at which we became thinking people, aware of the world. And you never get rid of it. So we can overcompensate for it. We can compensate for it. We can overcompensate for it. And become hyper liberal, hyper scientific, everything else. Obviously best to be cool. Yes, ma'am.
Joanne, you said that the majority of people never go beyond stage 3. what implication does that have for form of governance, self-governance, and democracy? I mean, is it possible for the masses to govern themselves, or is it necessary for an elite that has matured to govern?
Is that in your data?
First off, I nominate myself as president of the elite. Yeah, what about self-government? Again, we go back to it's the best form of all the worst forms there are. Democracy is a terrible, terrible, terrible system. It's just better than the others. And can we be self-governing? Well, that was the whole idea of schools, especially public schools, in which we taught everything to everybody and tried to make the religions and the other things go away so that we were teaching those things which we could prove. Things like, what is the English language and how does it work? That there are, in fact, adverbs, really. They're still out there, even though no one uses them. We have people who are eating healthy. Well, I have never seen a healthy. I don't know how to butcher it. I don't know how to bake it. But they're eating healthy. And it goes on and on and on. Again, the college students failing basic written English. These are second and third year college students failing. And I say, the whole idea of education, as far as I was concerned, was to bring about a greater knowledge of the world. We failed in that regard completely. We no longer, we simply promote based on age. We do not promote based on ability or function. We give great merit to simply existing. There's no merit in performance anymore. And I object to this as again, my doctorate is only in education. So I think I have some reasonable standing in saying we shouldn't be doing this. And yet this is what we're doing. We are encouraging people who should not be encouraged. We're saying, oh, you did a great job, when you blew it completely. You're terrible. And should education be a little more elitist? Yes, I think it should. I've taught in the community college level for quite so many years. Phil has, of course, taught in the university level for many years. Should everyone have the opportunity to go to community college? Yes, but there should be stringent examinations as to the capacity to get in there. Do you have the proper qualifications? If you don't, like any other job, if you're not qualified, no. Sorry. Now, if you look at the community college, however, as an intermediate, as a remedial high school, where you're being taught all the things that you should have learned in high school in order that you can now go to college, I would be fully in favor of that. But again, now that brings us back to that testing program and how do we go through that process. And I'm not good at that. I don't make that decision. My decision is the alarm clock is going off. Should I shut it off? That's my first decision of the day. Hi.
Thank you for this talk. This is a favorite topic of mine. In the past, it's not supported by what I'm currently reading, but in the past I've read that as far as, you might have opened with this and I was late, so I apologize. As far as evolution goes, our brain is not an integrated system, it's stacked. And that is a design flaw for us. Because it means that we are still living.
We have to blame God, don't we?
Or maybe we're still evolving. And eventually, if we last,
Yes.
it'll come together. But that is why we rely so heavily on our limbic responses.
Indeed.
Because we're still being chased by tigers.
And it's fast. It's amazingly fast. This part of our brain is mind-bogglingly fast. That's why we go through life in sort of a trance. We have a conscious mind. We are aware of what's going on in the world. We're aware of what's around us. We're operating with this part of our brain, so we're consciously aware of time and space, and we can function, but we can't think. And so one of the things I do, we talk about this, and then I say, and what's 12 divided by 3? all of you just stopped. You felt your brain change. You just went from here to here. This is the thinking. This is the cognitive part of your brain. And it's slow. It's hard to make it work. This is why education is so tedious, so difficult. We're not using this part of our brain. We're using this part. English does not exist in the real world. Sorry. Basic math, 1, 2, 3, 4, add 1, subtract 1, yes. Calculus does not. Sorry. Sorry, Scott. One of your favorite subjects. And so we have to think about this, is that we're doing a different thing because we're capable of it, and we really have to use it in order to live in our modern society, to develop things like this, like that. The rest of the creatures of the world don't know how this can be done, and that we do. And that, again, is a function of our frontal system and the fact that we have a brain which is changing from gray to white. So, yeah, agreed wholeheartedly. Yes, way back.
From a philosophy point of view, do these findings tend to support determinism versus free will?
I don't think it supports either. I would fall on the side of free will personally, as long as we remember that free will is bounded. As long as you stay within the boundaries of who you are, you can accomplish anything. But you can't accomplish that which is outside of you. I'm sorry, I will never, ever, ever play in the NBA. At 5'5", they go, hello, tiny little person. You know? So, but do I have the free choice to actually try to do it? Of course. I would fail miserably. So what do? I do something else. And so as long as I stay within my boundary, I'm free to do.
Well, when presented with a situation, this is my interpretation, we first respond with this 3-year-old determined point of view. And I think as 75% of people never get past that.
Correct.
So they're reacting to things from a predetermined position they established a long, long time ago.
Yep.
They are not reacting in a free will position. They think they are, they think
Yep.
but they're not.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Correct. Yeah, we start from here.
Yeah.
And hopefully if this is developed,
Thank you.
we then go, that can't be right. And go from there. Yes, Mr. Love.
Yes. I played with politics, and so you say only 25% of the people are thinking and reachable by logic. So what kind of implications is that for trying to affect the electorate to behave more in an enlightened manner?
I answer that question by saying Donald Trump.
Well, how do I, I'm working on this right now. How do I approach, what would be the best approach to try to improve the populace?
Oh, haven't we been working on this for centuries? The quality of man and how to improve man's status and how we...
George Lakoff talks a lot about that in his
Yeah.
books. One of them is Don't Think of an Elephant. It's about framing and cognitive
Indeed.
biases and how we might try to overcome them in a political context.
Yeah, and this becomes far beyond just thinking critically. This is the entire framework of life, politics, society, everything. We've gone beyond the individual into the group.
Two questions. One is going back to the discussion of adolescents and what they want and how they start, trying to prove they're better and status and all that. Lots of research is done based on, Western kids and Western adolescents.
Mm-hmm.
How does that change culturally?
Oh, huge
We
changes.
didn't hear that question at all.
The question of how, when we look at the Piagetian stage 3, we look at teenagers and that kind of thing. This is obviously with Western world. How does this change in the Eastern world and non-Western societies? Completely different. In the Western societies, of course, we give our youngsters a lot of freedoms. And in a classroom, they're expected to ask questions. They're expected to be thinking. We pry it out of them. If they don't ask questions, what's your thoughts on that? Whereas in the East, especially, you listen to the lecturer, And the test is, can you parrot back to the lecturer exactly what was said? Very different philosophy, very different way of educating. Again, in the East, you have much more of a subservience to the elder, subservience to the society. Yeah, to the group, to the whole society. In the West, we're a bit of rebels.
But is there sort of a difference there in the proportion of people who make it to stage 4, or I mean, who we consider?
It really doesn't work at stage 4, and we haven't done that study because, again, remember, it is all done based on apparatus.
Okay.
So we haven't tested that. I'm getting this. Yes, right there. You, yes. Surprise.
So, as a parent, I have a 17-month-old daughter. And,
2 months old?
What's that?
2 months old?
17 months. 17
months.
And we have another one on the way. And I'm wondering, how do we help her to navigate through the prejudices she's going to be absorbing when we don't really understand it ourselves?
You find her asking questions.
We didn't
Right.
hear that.
So we're talking about a 17-month-old and how do we handle this in terms of ameliorating her biases. I think the first thing is always be honest. Don't tell stories. Yes, Santa Claus is a wonderful idea, but then you have to, at some later time, tell your child, I lied. This is not good. So when the child asks about something, we have the internet. You can look it up. You can figure out exactly what's going on and help the child try to understand it. Now, even at 17 months, they're getting a pretty good idea how this world works. They're pretty sharp. They can chase the dog pretty well. and so as they're going through life, the more questions you answer honestly and allow them to experiment. One of the crazy things I did was when my son said, I was trying to teach him hot. And you just so let's get the hand next to the oven. And I'm going to hold his hand so it doesn't go very far. And we're going up this way, and we're going up this way, and we're going up this way. Warm, warm, warm. Hot. Oh, cool. Warm, hot. So when I say, and then we went to electricity. So I had a magneto. And you crank it up, and when you put your 2 fingers on it, it said hello. And so rather than have him sticking his fingers into the socket, we cranked this up, and it was only 12 volts. But enough so that you knew what electricity was. And then we hitched up a light bulb to it and cranked it up. It's the same thing.
Which institution is your son in?
Yeah, my son decided not to go into any intellectual approach. He's a salesman. He sells high-end watches. An inexpensive watch to him is $35,000. He sells watches that are $150,000, $200,000. He's the smart one in the family. Yes, sir.
This may be a 2-part question. This may be 2 related questions. I was wondering, going back a little bit, maybe why is it that the part of our brain that tries to understand the world at a young age clings to something such as religion, which has no founding whatsoever? And then moving on to the second part, why have we as a human race clung to that as well?
Well, when you start out as a child, you're ignorant. You know nothing, and you're asking a jillion questions. Any of us knows that when you got a 2-year-old, the questions you answer are why. Oh, it goes on, and after a while you want to scream, but you can't. You have to answer the question why. And they're always exploring. They're always into something. This is the foundation of all of our life experience. So it's the very first thing. Everything is built on top of that. So how do you get rid of the foundation? Well, you don't. You survive around it. And you pile in the intellectual stuff on top of it, which again goes back to the question here. When you have this 17-month-old, you do facts and figures. You do that which is real, rather than some false explanation. And if you don't know the answer, you can always look it up. The internet is marvelous. Okay, time is up. We're going to have to go away. So, what, 2 weeks and is Science Sunday? What you got?